folks, I'm Storm331. I was thinking this morning about some of the guides I've done for speedrunning, and I've not done one for the original Final Fight. Now I have done guides for Final Fight 2, but I just realized there's not many guides set up for Final Fight 1, aka the arcade version, as well as the console ports. So I figured I'd make some contributions to that area and get some guides up. Now, whether or not I'll do Final Fight 3 or not, that really depends. Would like to see it arrive on Switch or Switch 2, but that really depends on Capcom. They're really focusing mostly on a large number of games, so don't know if we're going to get any new Final Fight games, which is probably a hard no, or even revisits, but never say never. But anyway, today we're going to be covering Haggar, the protagonist of the Final Fight trilogy, and we're going to be covering this guy. It's going to be mostly basics for speedrunners as well as newcomers alike. This can also be applied to home console versions of this game too. So if you want to get into Final Fight 1, feel free to use this guide to help you out. But anyway, we're going to be covering Mike Haggar's moves, movement, and go over several other things while we're at it. So my apologies if I'm not a very good speaker or whatnot. I'm just not that good at talking, but I will do the best I can to do a good job doing this guide. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So in regards to Final Fight, of course introduced 3 new characters, being Haggar, Cody, and Guy, and it introduced a brand new system that would later be used in later future beat-em-ups. And those, of course, would be the concept of different characters with different playstyles. Now, up until Final Fight, just about everyone operated pretty much on the same wavelength or had the same sprites, so none of the characters were mostly played the same as the player 1. So if you were to play player 2, they would be the different palette swap with different name and whatnot, but they just did the same thing as player 1. So this game, as well as Golden Axe, kind of changed the way beat-em-ups are done. So instead of having your generic players being somewhat the same character or whatever, they gave us different characters. Of course, I should probably point out both Golden Axe and Final Fight came out in the same year. Of course, if you remember Golden Axe, that game had 3 different characters, each with unique play styles. Of course, Gilius was pretty much different, but Tyrus and Axe Valor were, despite using swords, also played pretty much more differently in terms of magic. But here in Final Fight, we get 3 different characters with 3 different techniques. The first one being Haggar, of course, being our power-based fighter, but also the slowest. Whereas you have Cody being our well-balanced fighter, not being excelling at either speed or strength, but at the same time not the worst as those two. And of course you have Guy, who's actually our fastest character, but is also technically the least strongest. So this would get used in later future beat-em-ups. And we're going to go ahead and start covering Haggar. Haggar is our power-based fighter, of course. He's our slowest. Unfortunately, Final Fight 1 was actually Haggar's most, not his best outing, pretty much. And that's because he had an issue with his grabs, where if he grabbed an enemy, sometimes he'll accidentally drop them while you're going for moves. As you can see here, sometimes enemies will break out grabs, and Haggar pretty much had a big, huge hurt box whenever he attacks, too. So that actually hurt him in the long haul. But still, he's actually one of the more better characters to play. He, unlike the other characters, he can actually grab enemies and move them like this. He also gets a large amount of infinity iframes when performing his normal throw of the backdrop. And he can also make full use of surviving large groups thanks to that. But overall, Haggar was definitely not better in this game, but he actually got way loads better in the later installments. Final Fight 2 and 3 were arguably his best outings. I would like to say Final Fight 3 is probably the best Haggar you'll probably ever see. As you'll come to know. But anyway, overall, Haggar is just one of the more powerful characters. He's actually very good in a two-player scenario, especially if you want to take out enemies pretty quickly. Of course, Haggar is pretty powerful himself. He can wipe out most enemies with lower health bars pretty well, and he can rack up a ton of damage pretty quickly. Of course, he does have issues. His infinite is not very reliable. I'm using turbo, of course, because that does I do have issues with my hands if I play it on regular. But if you're playing this for legitimately for speedruns, I would strongly recommend not using turbo, which I'm doing right here. Anyway, let's go back to the start of the stage. But overall, when you do use Haggar, you should it will take him quite a while to use the infinite. That can be done on most normal enemies, except for the Endories, and unlike Thrasher that we just fought briefly, that will not work on most bosses. But then again, Haggar does not really need the almighty infinite, because his throws deal a lot more damage for the most part, except for when the enemy gets down to their last health bar and getting close to being defeated. That's when throw damage becomes more weaker in general. But overall, Haggar still deals huge amount of damage, as you can see here. So for the most part, we're gonna go over his moves right now. Let me toggle this back down to regular attack rather than turbo. And we're going to go ahead and get started with his moves. So Haggar has the body blow, which serves as his normal attack. This has probably the largest amount of reach. One good thing about all three playable characters in Final Fight is that all of them have very good striking range. As you can see right here, Haggar can pretty much get a pretty good striking range in general with his punches. But his turnaround is not very fast. And then again, you have to be pretty fast in turn. But you do have to be careful though, because enemies, this does extend Haggar's hitbox quite large by far. So if enemies can hit him from a distance, he will get hit in turn. But this allows him to easily hit enemies that would normally be hiding in off bounds as well. In turn. So when you're using Haggar, if your enemies are hiding out of bounds, you can always try to fish them out with the body blow. He does go for 3 hits, as you'll see right here. Now you can do a chain throw when you do up to 2 hits, as long as you're holding a direction that's not forward. Now let's see if I can get one enemy cooperate. Nope. These guys have too low health. So we'll try again here. So as long as you're holding down, up, or back when you're on your transitioning from your second hit to the third hit, this will allow Haggar to do his backdrop without having to grab the enemy. And this can also be comboable from enemies. So if you're attacking one enemy and they go down, you can grab the next enemy and throw them. And this gives Haggar quite a large amount of iframes, so he's pretty much protected. You can literally do the compactor combo and basically give Haggar some additional iframes in turn, and that will be very useful for protecting him. The purpose of the chain throw is to protect your character from being hit, because you're going to get swarmed by enemies in the arcade version or the home console version. So the chain throw is existent in all versions of Final Fight. So this is available in Final Fight 2 as well as Final Fight 3. But unfortunately in Final Fight 2 they took away the invincibility frames for Haggar, so you will not be able to take full advantage of that in that game, unlike you do here. So next thing, we're going to cover his jump attacks. So this is his stationary jump attack. It's always the drop kick, and when you jump forward, you still get the drop kick. So this actually is pretty much Haggar's long distance striking range. It's actually one of the better jump attacks in my opinion, outside Guy's forward jump kick. And we'll do his body press body splash, which is down attack during the air. This is good for cornering enemies. One unique feature is that when you do the reverse body splash, enemies will get knocked over in the opposite direction instead of the intended method. Normally they would be knocked in the other way, but in Haggar's case, he can easily perform the reverse body drop, and they get turned in the other way. So you can use that to protect yourself from any enemies that might try to get up to you from behind. If you're not into doing the chain throws. So that actually serves as a good cover protection for Haggar. So anyway, that covers all of his jump attacks. I don't have the damage values, unfortunately, but it does pretty much roughly the same amount of damage you would do with your normal punches, but not as much. So anyway, we can now start going to grabs. We'll start with the grapple strikes. So this is the headbutts. So when Haggar grabs enemies with headbutts, not only will you be able to move opponents with Haggar, you'll be able to easily get them to. You can easily do 3 headbutts. That's almost enough to take out this Jake right here. But it does. That's arguably one of Haggar's most damaging moves, because in the arcade version and home console ports, this is like your grapple strikes are actually your highest damage dealers. And it still remains that way in Final Fight 2 as well. Unfortunately, enemies can easily break out of the headbutts, though, for grapple strikes. So you gotta be very quick on the inputs. Even with turbo fire applied, that's also another issue as well, because enemies can still break out of that pretty quickly. So the next move we're going to cover is his backdrop. The backdrop, of course, is Haggar's default throw, and you'll basically, it doesn't cover as huge range as Cody and Guy's regular throws, but it does allow you to give you more invincibility frames, as well as help you protect yourself from any enemies trying to get right behind you. So as you see here, against lower health enemies, the backdrop will not defeat the enemies pretty quickly. Against higher vitality enemies, this does quite a bit of damage. As you see right here. Of course, the damage is always set, but against higher enemies with higher health, they can easily be defeated, deal more damage. So it's always a very good, useful ability to use. Not to mention it has pretty high grab range during a chain attack. So anyway, that covers the backdrop. Now we're going to come up to Haggar's more notable grabbing move, and probably what it's more famous for, the pile driver. The pile driver is probably Haggar's strongest tool outside of his infinite and chain attack damage. So this is almost capable of one-shotting most enemies, or at least at low health, but it does very high damage against enemies that are that have huge health. It's always a nice, cool finisher, too. Now, believe it or not, if you get knocked down, it is possible to grab enemies if they're very near to you, and you're quick to mash the attack and jump buttons all together. You can easily do the pile driver on recovery as well. But that's very rare, and I would be strongly advised not to do that as your answer to wake up. So against weaker enemies, you can always easily take them all out, but it does have set damage, of course. But yeah, it's always cool to play the pile driver, and this also protects Haggar on his way down when he attacks enemies. So when you grab enemies for the pile driver, and if any enemies are right near you when you do that, you can easily do that. And if any of them come near you, you can do a stationary pile driver. And basically just use that to protect your character. Now, in later installments, Haggar does get the spinning pile driver, which replaces his original pile driver. So this is the only time in the Final Fight series that Haggar gets a regular pile driver. Apparently, it's the reason why he got a spinning pile driver in later games was because it was just a rip-off Zangief. according to lore, both he and Zangief have ripped each other off on each moves because Haggar was the originally had the lariat, and Zangief started using that. And of course, Haggar had a more devastating pile driver, and Zangief created the spinning pile driver. Of course, if you read his bio in the Alpha series, Zangief created the spinning pile driver while wrestling bears in the Siberian frozen wastelands. But he got caught up in a huge windstorm and performed a spinning pile driver as a result. So somehow, in between Final Fight 1 and 2, Haggar was able to execute a spinning pile driver himself. Now, pretty interestingly enough, whereas Zangief uses bears for training, Haggar uses bull sharks as his preferred animal of training. Of course, nowadays that would literally get you in a massive amount of trouble with with the law and whatnot, so I would not strongly advise doing that in real life. But yeah, you can also jump with enemies with the pile driver as well. But yeah, the pile driver is always a fantastic finisher, and it can also be used as a means to protect Haggar. You can also have Haggar move forward when performing the pile driver as well. So anyway, that covers pretty much all of Haggar's attacks. One thing to keep in mind about his movement, being slow, he moves more slowly when he moves up and down, but when you're moving diagonally, though, you'll notice that he walks pretty much at the same speed as he does at a regular forward or back pace. So if you want to move up or down most of the time with Haggar, do it diagonally. Do not do up or down unless you're trying to go for items. And technically, when you're going for speed tech, you always want to be doing backward jumps because that gives Haggar more jumping speed. In later games, for Final Fight 2 and 3, he would later gain accessibility to more faster jump for forward, as opposed to here in this game, because the forward jump is pretty terrible. And this not only applies to Haggar, but this also applies to Cody and Guy as well. So technically, with all three characters, you should always be doing reverse jumping for your movement, because that's your fastest movement in general. But one thing to keep in mind, though, is that your enemies will attack you more frequently if you do reverse jumps. Because ironically enough, they will never attack you when you're doing a forward jump. Unless you're close to them and they decide to attack you anyway. But anyway, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're forward jumping, your enemies will not attack you. If you're reverse jumping, though, they will attack you. Let's see if I can get a perfect example. Okay, that was not what I meant to do. Yeah, you saw that Jade try to go for the attack right there? That's why you do not want to be doing reverse jumping your enemies, because enemies will attack you. And this applies to probably all other games after Final Fight 1 as well. Like Final Fight, that happens most of the time with Final Fight 2, and it's probably possible that happens too in Final Fight 3 as well. So basically, when you're speedrunning, you always want to do reverse jumping. Just do not do that near enemies. Enemies usually in this game do love to try to get in front of you most of the time and force you to fight them rather than letting you get to a force point. So basically, when it comes to force points, you want to make sure that you eliminate only the enemies that appear at the stop points. Any enemies that were before the stop point, you don't have to defeat them. But it's just the enemies that do appear at the stops that you do need to defeat in order to advance. You don't have to fight every last enemy. But that's easier said than done in speedruns for this game, because it's not as easy as it appears. Because some enemies just love to get in your way. Another tool recommendation I would recommend if you're playing this version on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle is to assign your attack and jump button to one of your buttons. That way you don't have to do the do this extra joy through the normal way of hitting both the attack and jump buttons together. This gives you a little bit more leeway and saves you a bit more time. One final thing I want to cover is the extra joy. The extra joy does probably 10% more damage on your character for every time you successfully use it, but it's a pretty good tool to use against any enemy that's right near you, and it gives your character temporal invincibility. So if any enemies try to get up to you close, you can always use the lariat right here to protect you. Unfortunately, one of the downsides about performing the lariat with Haggar is that you don't get as much invincibility time as the spin kicks that Cody and Guy do for their extra joys. That's very important to know when you're dealing with Hollywood and Elgato as well, because if they go for their acrobatic knife moves, you will lose the invincibility frames when they do that. So if you do it too early and they try to go for that, you're pretty much screwed. So yeah, one thing to keep in mind when you do this is that it will always take 10% off of your health for each time you use the extra joy. But it's also a pretty darn good way to protect your character and more importantly keep Haggar safe. But of course, unlike Final Fight 2, you cannot chain this into a chain attack. So I'm pretty much prepared to guess this almost does like 20 damage to enemies here, but the damage might be a little bit more different here than it is in Final Fight 2. So don't take my word for it. But yeah, basically with Haggar, Haggar does have the most difficult infinite in the game in general with his punches. You only get one punch to work with. Now, on certain occasions, though, you will have the ability to rack up an additional hit, but that's pretty rare. And that usually occurs whenever you're hitting your attack button more frequently. In fact, one of Haggar's super moves in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is actually based on this glitch. So anyway, this is the infinite for Haggar. I'm not doing it as fast as most people would do that. And one thing to keep in mind about the infinite is that think of it as more of a rhythm game. So if you're trying to do it all at once, the frame inputs will get eaten up and you'll get stuck. Now, sometimes when you're doing the infinite, you'll get an undertow that happens, and that, from what I learned, it's called a hit stop, and that prevents your character from turning around in between the frame for the most part. Unfortunately, Haggar does have an issue for fighting bosses with the infinite, so it is possible to do infinites with Haggar. It is just not as easy as Cody and Guy. It's a little bit more easier to do with the auto fire applied, but it is just not that easy with Haggar in general. Basically, with Haggar, I would strongly recommend just prioritizing using his grabs, pile driver, headbutts to get most of your damage. Just remember when you get to your opponent's final life bar, you will not deal a whole lot of damage with your throws, but use your throws and pile driver and headbutts to get your damage going. And you'll pretty much get a lot more coverage with Haggar. He's actually a very good character to use in two-player mode, and definitely works pretty well with both Guy and Cody in general. So adding Haggar to your double playthrough will make it a lot more easier, because Haggar can defeat enemies pretty quickly with just about all of his attacks, as well as his other throws and moves. Just keep in mind that you will not be able to do the infinite as much as Cody and Guy do. So anyway, that concludes my guide for Haggar. I will be doing guides for Final Fight Arcade on either my days off or when I feel like it. So I'm gonna try to make sure not to put so much content on Twitch, because if I do that, I get in trouble with them. So I'm gonna pace myself. So I think every 3 days after my tutorial, I will do another one. So we'll cover Cody next for our speedrun guide with him. And then we'll follow up with Guy, and then we'll do speedrun guides for each of the stages, so that way players will know what to expect and know what they'll get themselves into when they speedrun Final Fight Arcade or its console ports. So anyway, if you enjoyed the content that I put out for on my stream and YouTube channels, feel free to follow and sub on my Twitch channel, as well as sub to my YouTube channel. That helps these channels grow bit by bit. And I will see you all again later today for Donkey Kong Bonanza. We'll get back to that, and I will have this video highlighted and exported to YouTube. And then I'll have that put up on speedruns.com on some future day. So anyway, our Motor Storm 331 signing off. Have a great day. Take care, and I will see you all next time.